We have all this intellectual capital here. We have all these institutions. We have a great location. We have great access to the airport and international access. And so we're so much further ahead than most cities having this discussion.
I have never lived or worked any place where there is such an absolutely intimate, personal connection of a community and a people with their transit system.
I look out my window and I look across the channel and I literally see the innovation economy growing before my very eyes.
Economic development in Boston is more than just real estate development. It's about creating the kind of city that attracts young entrepreneurs, that attracts those who want to innovate, those who are looking to solve society's problems. It's about creating the kind of city that supports that.
You can't have a successful city and have one aspect of it. I think you have to look at and do it across the board. And if we're successful in looking at changing some of the lifestyle in Boston, we're going to keep people here.
If you want innovation, you need to have innovation everywhere. You need to have new places open all the time. You need to have people being able to try things. What we need to do is we need to be able to have things where we have zones where maybe we experiment with later hours, we have different kinds of permits, or we allow people to get subsidized deals to go into new areas and things like that, so that we're creating the environment where new things can happen. The new mayor we have has clearly indicated that he's much more open to these ideas than the past mayor in terms of looking at the T running later, looking at places staying open.
Right. We want Boston to be the kind of city that people want to live and choose to come to. And so I'm really proud to work with the mayor on the Late Night Initiative, understanding Boston as a 21st century city, that Boston's safe, but it's accessible, and there are services and products that make sense.
The hard part in a complicated old city like Boston is, the way the regulations are set up and the way the policies are set up. They're not set up to encourage creativity. And what would be nice is that our political folks are encouraged to think as creatively as we're encouraging ourselves to think. We have lots of innovators. It would be nice if we as a city in our infrastructure began to think the same way.
We have 20th century, at best, institutional and governmental models, and we're supposed to be trying to do a 21st century world.
Yeah, I think affordable housing is the big issue for our city. You don't want to have it just be a city of really wealthy people and really poor people, which is kind of where we're headed.
So innovation generally happens in places where you allow for the economic realities of low rents, low occupancy costs. Well, I think we need to expand our view. The city's done a great job of marketing the Innovation District based on kicking off something new, giving it a name, giving it a face, giving it identity, and that worked. But that's not an exclusive thing. That's not about innovation happening within the boundaries of this piece of real estate. There should be and needs to be places all over the city where that economic reality works for innovation.
You have so many regulations, it's so costly to build anything in Boston. Boston is one of the most expensive cities in the country to build anything. You can only build the most high-end condo because you can't make money otherwise, right?
Our high-end housing in Boston we're doing well with. There's a lot of cranes right now in Boston, and under those cranes are high-end rental units. We also do decent when there's money around in the grant programs, both federal and state, on low-income housing. Where we have to find out is how do we fund the middle market housing?
We could absorb 20,000 housing units in the city right now if they were the right price. We're not anywhere, we're building 1,000 units a year, 2,000 units a year. We're not even getting close to demand. We need to take parts of the city and say we're gonna build densely and we're gonna build thousands of units there. And it's the only way we're gonna ever really fix the problem. We need to allow developers to build different kinds of units, smaller units, making the permitting process more streamlined, giving away city land for cheap. The city owns a lot of property still.
We have to look at how can we use some of the land here in the city, public land that we own, to be able to develop some mid-range housing on it, and how do we pay for it? That's really the big key. Where's the funding source for that? Because you're not getting the $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month rents as you are in the big downtown, and you don't have a subsidy coming in on the lower end. So that's what we're kind of looking at now.
There is no magic bullet on how to do it. There's existing housing stock in our neighborhoods that is much cheaper than the core areas, That kind of housing stock needs to be places that our young people will move. You saw it happen in the South End, it worked. You're seeing it happen in South Boston, it works. And so as we begin to spread out, and these areas are perceived to be safer and more collaborative, you'll find existing lower cost housing.
I mean, I think certain neighborhoods will feel that they're being overdeveloped. I would like to spread it out into communities more, give other neighborhoods the opportunity to benefit from development and job creation. Everyone kind of grabs onto an area and they want to be in that hot new area. And what we have to do is, our job is going to be to create other areas that can be hot.
There's a movement afoot here with, we call it microhousing. What it essentially is all about making smaller living spaces, like really tight living spaces, like cruise ship kind of living spaces. And that comes with being in the core area of the city, where you can walk out your door and you can feel like the restaurant across the street is also part of your house, and the park on top of the building is where you hang out. And so it's really about how you define what home is.
You know, mixed-use development or mixed-use communities, mixed-use, mixed-income communities is very, very important to the city. You know, if you live in a neighborhood and you have a grocery store nearby, you have a hardware store nearby, you have a laundromat nearby, then all of a sudden you begin to have all of the amenities that you need for an increased quality of life.
Our goal is essentially to leave space in the Fenway for incubation for one-off, interesting people who have creative ideas. And so we think that you need to have that kind of balance, to have a neighborhood have character and diversity and not become whitewashed like a suburban community.
They need to protect the ground floor retail space. If you just let the market dictate, that will all become, you know, residential, and then what you'll have is people have to drive to retail instead. And ground floor retail is a really important part of transit-oriented development.
I'm gonna suggest that we close our eyes and just wind up taking some things out and just take the T out. Just take the T out. It's not here. Just imagine, what would Boston be? What would this region be? What would this Commonwealth be if there were not a T?
It's hard for like our parents' generation to understand, because for the last 30 years there's been this propaganda sold to them that like anything other than a car is not first class transportation, that you know, people won't use public transit. Just the whole bill of goods that the auto industry sold for the last 30 years and destroyed all those cities.
People will criticize the Central Artery Third Harbor Tunnel project, the big dig, and saying it cost so much money. It gave us the Rose Kennedy Greenway, which opened up Boston. It does work. People do move through Boston quicker. You know, we need infrastructure like that so we can make dramatic changes here in the city.
It was $15+ billion, change the way Boston functions. We need to spend significant money on our public transportation systems.
Oh my God, we can't spend that kind of money on public transit. We can't use federal money on this or state money on this. What do you think the highway program is? That's federal and state money subsidizing automobiles, which are destroying the environment, all the fossil fuels cause, all the war. Why don't we stop subsidizing that and start subsidizing a different kind of transit?
Infrastructure, the quality of that infrastructure is absolutely critical to our overall quality of life and economic competitiveness for the future. To me, it's almost like a no-brainer.
Without fixing public transit and making it better, we're not going to be able to realize our full potential, and it's a huge issue because the cities that have the best public transit, New York, San Francisco, London, are the most desirable cities.
We, as the people, need to really step out and craft what is it that we want in terms of a public transit system. We want late night service. We want late night service. We want late night service. What is the vision that I'd love to see for this area? Close my eyes. I want to be able to see how we can pump a 24/7 T. The challenge for all of us is how we're going to wind up being able to sustain it. Even if you told me tomorrow, we loved it, Bev, run it. Now run it 24/7. We can't do that. We don't have the power. We don't have the signals. We don't have the infrastructure. I don't have the facilities. We don't have the equipment. Haven't even told you the fun part yet about the people.
Our ridership right now is the same as it was in 1945, which was the peak of our ridership. We've hit that level again. We haven't added a new public transit line in Boston. Now the T would argue, okay, well the Silver Line is a new public transit line. Well, it's not really, because it's a bus, let's just be honest. And the fact is that we need to make that into a real light rail line. We need an urban ring. We need to start thinking seriously about building new subway lines, building underground subway lines that cost billions of dollars.
We need to get more people on the T. That's what we need to do, and get fewer people in cars. And that's another piece of it. You know, the T can make investments, but if they don't have the ridership to support the infrastructure, you know, they can't just shift resources around because they don't have the resources. They don't have the luxury of having extra money to create new resources. So we have to continue increasing the ridership on the MBTA. That's one piece of it.
Ridership for us is not an issue, okay? The issue is capacity and quality.
And so on some of our transit lines, we need to increase service. That's a good thing, right? Because there's more demand. We've developed more there, and more people are trying to use it. On the Green Line, for instance, on certain parts of the Green Line, there's just not enough capacity.
The existing T stations that are congested are a good thing. We just need to find a way to be more efficient about how to use them. And putting more people into those systems is not a bad thing. Those are the hubs we want to create. We just want to create more of those hubs. And so extending lines like the Green Line out to Somerville and places like that are a great thing where you can.
As we develop, we'll take certain pressures off of certain parts of the city and begin to spread it out. And that will allow the services that we have in other parts of the city to be used better.
I think not just Boston, I think our country has an infrastructure problem, and the federal government really needs to address that. We've done some of it here up on Beacon Hill at the State House with some programs, and we're fixing some bridges, but we really need a major infrastructure piece of legislation so we can really start the movement.
You know, people talk about tax increment financing and value capture from developments and all of that. Absolutely, those should be parts of the absolute permanent mix of what goes in the fund.
We can't depend upon private industry to pay for it, but I'm not shy from asking people to go into a public-private partnership as long as we're able to be consistent and make it happen.
If we only think that the model that we're going to attack it with is, you know, public sector and Big Poppy comes with monopolistically funding everything and all that, that's not how the infrastructure that got here to begin with, okay? It wasn't a T that built this. Quite candidly, this was largely built on private sector. There are different ways of doing business that will cause us to step out of the comfort zone that we have and really do some very, very, very transformational things.
My job will be to help advocate for investments in public transportation. It'll be to help advocate for investment in the biking infrastructure in the city, help advocate for people to use the biking and public infrastructure. It also means that Boston is going to continue to be more and more a walkable city, right? And that we're paying attention when development happens, that pedestrians are a very important part of the design.
Most cities have trouble because they're so spread out that they have to be dependent on cars. And because of the proximity of the neighborhoods here, people can walk. And it's really about connections and connectability. It's about taking barriers down between the neighborhoods. And that's about creating streetscapes and creating unbroken retail that you feel like you're passing multiple storefronts.
And it's really about the things like the bike program and bike paths and better public transit and things like Uber. There's a place for automobiles in the urban environment. Car sharing, Zipcar. I mean, I don't own a car right now. I use Uber, I use taxis, and I take the T all the time, right? I can get anywhere I want in the city. I have no problem getting around. It's just a generational thing. We're just going to need to let that generation kind of fade into the sunset.
You know, Boston is a better city today than it was. It's a more united city. It's a more accessible city. I heard Mayor Walsh talk about the need to rebrand Boston as that, to market Boston as a different Boston so that the images of Boston aren't the Boston of 3-4 decades ago.
For the first time in my 30 years of developing here, we are one of the 5 most attractive cities to international investors in the country now. We're on the top of the list, and people want to put money here because they see our future, just like we see our future, and it's a good thing. We need to take advantage of it.
We're doing initiatives that have previously been a part of the city of Boston, but maybe didn't get the attention from, the 5th floor of the mayor's office before, I think is becoming a real priority for us. The young people in the city, they see that talking to Mayor Walsh is not just talking to someone who isn't going to take action, but he's actually listening and wanting to incorporate their ideas.
How do we keep that excitement of change in Boston? There's constant change. 3 years from now, everything that we're doing will be old.
It's just about taking the barriers off the way we think, and instead of saying no half the time, saying, okay, let's think about it, it's a good idea. So it's about money, it's about infrastructure and public transportation, and again, the hard part is keeping costs low. That's going to be the secret sauce if we can figure it out.
Are we going up? Are we going to invest in ourselves? Are we going to see a future that is, and I'm saying this future, 24/7? I think that's something I can get excited about.
We have just the absolute embarrassment of resources that every major city in the world aspires to be able to have.
Education, transportation, the whole thing in terms of infrastructure and innovation. We are just so absolutely blessed.
Everyone needs to look at Boston with fresh eyes and don't get hung up on this bullshit where we're like, oh, we're Boston, we can't do this, we can't do that. We should be one of the premier cities of the next 100 years. We have a long history, we've done a lot of good things, and I think that history of innovation and of progressive thinking, and that's the type of thing we want to be known for as a city.
Your tough times define your character. There have been tough things that have happened here all the way back through hundreds of years. We have deep roots and values and culture, and it makes it so interesting to be a part of this place.